this is Rosemergy Towers across here, and then further round
The
is
Rosemergy Towers are
those ones with the sun just
the
striking
ivy
over and the ivy on them, Andrew.
Yeah.
Rosemergy Towers. Now, just to the left of the ivy, you'll see what is it actually a slab? Well, it's a very steep one, and it's a huge piece of rock that has broken off and slipped slightly. And behind it, in fact, there is a wonderful cave, an open-ended cave. That cave, I was told by a very old lady who lived in this area, that she said that her great-grandparents had talked about this cave as being known as Church Cave, and that a particular group, religious group, I assume they would have been Methodists, but they were a small local group, actually used to go down to the cave there for Sunday worship, which instantly chimed with me, because I had always thought of this cave as being extremely church-like in a way, because it had the way it rests against the actual main cliff is just like a great pier or groin. Now further round from here, if you go down, you'll see two very, very lovely pieces of granite, one above the other. The sun is on them at the moment. They're very silvery grey. At the base of the first one is, in fact, an adit that runs into the hillside and is connected to Watchcroft Mine, which was part of the Morva Consols, I think was the official name of it. And now that adit runs straight in there. No one has been able to get into Watchcroft. I think possibly, at a guess, for perhaps say 100 years, or since it closed, which was the late 19th century. But there's a very good friend of mine called Tony Bennett, who is a mining engineer. And Tony was a remarkable explorer of mines. He would be everywhere. Watchcroft frustrated him hugely because he had tried and tried to find some kind of way into it, and he had always failed. There were blockages everywhere. And then he phoned me one day, and my heart fell slightly when he said, "I found an adit down on the cliff. I think we should go and have a look at it." And it was this adit entrance. It was blocked completely. Tony had cleared the front of it.
Yeah.
And we went down there, and my heart fell, because we had to get on our bellies and push our way under this soaking wet entranceway. And we got into this adit. We're able to stand up, and there it was, a beautiful, beautiful tunnel running into the cliff with rusted remnants of rails where they ran the actual trucks. And sitting on ledges were what they call kibbles. These are iron buckets that the miners used. Sitting there, we found two of them. But when we touched them, the rims actually just broke off like pie crust. And at one point, our finger went through. They were so oxidized, and so we had to leave them. We walked in about a matter of, I think, maybe 100 yards or so, getting very excited, until we came across a blockage with a huge spout of water coming, roaring out of it. And Tony was so annoyed. Again, he had been blocked effectively in getting into this mine. He started to pull rocks away, and of course I realised that with the force of water that was coming through, there must have been an enormous house of water, as they called it, behind this rockfall. And that if we cleared it completely, we would have been probably swept out to sea. So I said to Tony, "I don't think we should go further." And he said, "No, I know we shouldn't." Okay, and we had to retreat. So there it remains, and I don't think anyone has been into that mine, but the feeling is if we had found remnants of rails and kibbles, rusting kibbles, that there could be a marvellous collection of artefacts in there from way back.
Is that tin, presumably, not copper?
This was copper. I think Morva Consols, very much it was copper. And I have spoken to older miners who've said that the mine, when it was abandoned, I think late 19th century typically, that there was still a lot of copper in there. I don't know the full history. They may have mined tin as well, but it was known for copper. Times I've seen during that winter snow right down on the ledges by the sea, so that you had the white breakers coming in, and it's indistinguishable in times. The rest of the cliff, there were layers of white all over it. Quite remarkable. Usually didn't last very long, because you would get the wind would turn to the south, and I mean I've felt it. The wind like a huff of warmth. The whole world would suddenly become like opening an oven door. And you could see almost before your eyes, you could see the snow just going. It would just go, and everything then would become water. just water everywhere, glistening and rippling and rattling around. It was quite incredible. So it was an interesting time for weather, as I say. So, and I've noticed in looking back on these little pieces that in the summer I'd be constantly saying the forecasters were hoping for an improvement, were hoping for sunshine, were hoping for high pressure to build. And when it did, it would be a matter of celebration. In June, you would have rain, mist, fog, all sorts of winds howling. And then suddenly one week, I'd be writing about the midsummer glory, heat, everything, flowers growing, insects buzzing everywhere. And it was noticeable. It was something that stood out. The next week, it would be bang, huge, great, big Atlantic fronts would come crashing in again. So I really found it's almost a kind of obsessive weather record. And because it was that routine of every week, it kind of stands almost as a anecdotal perhaps, because I wasn't taking weather measurements, if you like, but I was describing the weather. So it was a very, very interesting period, and I often refer to it when people talk about we've never had wet summers like this, or what's the rest of it, or isn't it a cold winter? We haven't had that kind of snow for many years now. This is the kind of climbing hole that is a little gift, really. This one particularly, it's a type of, it's an extrusion in the granite. It may be schorl or something else like it. And it's just like, I used to think it's like a cloven hoof. I used to think when you'd start on this climb, you were shaking hands with the devil instantly. You'd go and oh yeah, it's okay. And it's an excellent little hold. It's only the start of the climb, so there's no real great problem. That is the kind of hold you would like at the really hard or serious sections of the climb higher up. It would be very useful, that hold. But that's the nature of rock, that's the nature of climbing. But it's part of this whole slab. It's a wonderful little slab, this, it really is. Granite at its best. It's that very, very hard granite with big granular crystals all over it. Wonderful.
And you've climbed it?
This is a route I put up as a first ascent, which means I did the first ascent, which is a thing in climbing. And it's when I first saw it, when I came past it, I was putting other shorter routes up around the sides. And I remember looking at this and thinking, oh, that looks quite easy. It looks about V-diff or severe, which in climbing is very, very reasonable level. And so I left it. I thought, I'll leave this. And it became effectively the last one I had to look at. And of course, it turned out to be the hardest one of all. So it goes up,
yeah,
and follows these crack lines, quite a reasonable standard, good protection. Because as you understand in climbing, you're doing it's done in a very formal way. Effectively, you have ropes and you have protection gear you put in, and you have a second who is belaying you. So if you fall, he holds you or she holds you. But when you get up to the actual top section there, it becomes pretty hard, and you have to make some quite hard moves out onto a tiny little foot ledge in the middle of you can just see it in the middle of the upper face. Fix gear in that long crack, and then you have to make 2 or 3 quite hard moves to finish.
To get over the top
is the hard move, really. There are 2 or 3 hard moves. Getting yourself established, you've got to get your feet up into that crack, then stand up, and you're just teetering a little bit. But there's no great hole to finish with. It's all tiny little crystals, and you manage to get pinched in between 2 fingers, and you're standing there and you're just thinking, I've got to make this move, because if you come off, you're not going to be badly damaged because you have good gear at your feet, but you're likely to get bruised and bashed a little bit. So your whole being is saying, no, I've got to make this move, and it always works because you just have to go for it. But you're putting your toe of your climbing boot on tiny little pieces like that. There's hardly anything there at all. It'll hold you, but your mind is always saying, that's not going to hold me. I'm going to slip. And you've got these little, and it works, and you're over. But if any hesitation, this is the beautiful thing about climbing, any hesitation, any sense in your mind that I'm going to slip, you will slip. So you have to, confidence has a lot to do with it. You have to go for it. I was fishing from 1967, 68, right through to 1981, 82.
Yes. And when were you folk singing?
That was when I first came to Cornwall. That was in the 64, 65 time. During that period when it was the big thing, yeah. But I don't let anyone know that, Andrew. I try to avoid the fact that for 2 years, I made money as a folk singer. I find it quite incredible, actually, when I look back.
Did you make money fishing?
Oh yes, I mean that was a big. In the 70s, we did extremely well, and I was very fortunate to work on extremely good boats. I lost a lot of gear, and then I lost gear working west of the Isles of Scilly in that late, I think it was 1980, when we had some dreadful weather. We had a lot of swell running that year, lots of lows running through, so I lost gear then, and the whole thing began to just get on top of me, and I thought, I knew I had to go into a different type of fishing, spend a lot more money getting more gear and so on, and I decided I'd had enough. This is the what was I've been told was known as Church Cave, but we've always just known it as Rosemary Cave. It was known as Church Cave because apparently there was a group of Methodists, as I said, who used to come down here and hold prayer meetings, which I thought was fantastic because, of course, you know, almost cliche-like, you can see it is the element of a church-like place. It really is, the big archway. But what seems to have happened probably here is that this piece of what is the detached slab now was part of this, and there was a kind of must have been a landslip or something, and it's dropped down and it's snapped and cracked high up and then thumped back against it, so you can see where it closes up there. And so we're looking, as I say, at the two sides of a rift, really. Now, interestingly enough, there is a rock climb that goes straight up here, and you see where that little bit of rock is just stuck against it. You get up there and you go this side of the rock, and you just manage to wiggle your head through, and the rest of you, and then you're out on the top. And it's actually not very difficult. It's very difficult to start with, because what you do is you get your feet either side, and the further you move up, the more secure it becomes, until you've got your back against one side and your feet against the other. And then you get up to the top there, as I say, and slither through here. But each time you do it, it's horrible, because you get up there and you get your head through into the daylight. And what's in your mind, of course, you're thinking, if this slips again at this moment,
lose your head.
Boom, you're gone, you know. Oh. But it's not a difficult climb. See, it's hard to start. I mean, I'm going to do it now because it's all too wet. But you actually bridge across with your feet like that, and you just keep moving up, and you get into position. As it narrows, of course, you've got more and more leverage of your body, and you turn and you end up your feet against that side, and you can just sit there, hands free. It's wonderful. And then till you get to the exit. Great fun. I was slightly restricted because I came from a family a Scottish family, but one that didn't have a great deal of connection with the mountains or the sea, indeed. Very urban. I think my parents probably spent their entire lives walking on flat surfaces. And so when I started going off to the hills and so on and climbing, there was a strong degree of disapproval. And when I got my first climbing rope, I had to hide it under the bed. It was like, most teenagers, most teenagers had copies of Health and Efficiency hidden under their teenage boys anyway. But I had a rope, and when it was found, it was like something satanic. And my entire family, a very big extended family, they would actually refer to the mountains as the heathen hills. They saw them as, something that was not at all merited. And so the mountains became very much my focus. When I came to Cornwall, I even brought climbing boots. I bought ice crampons with me. Can you believe it? I just brought them out of a kind of sentiment. Although I'd gone to North Wales on the way, and I had dreams of going into Europe and into the Alps and so on. And shortly after coming here, when I was folk singing for 2.5 years, and then I had this sudden overwhelming desire to go to sea. It was amazing, because the sea I hadn't connected with it much. But out of nowhere, I thought I just have to go to sea. And of course, I went to sea. I had the kind of misfortune of never being seasick, because Newland was full of dreamers from up country, poets and dreamers, marching down the quay and getting berths on fishing boats and doing one trip and staggering back up the quay. And that was the last of them. And I was very blessed, because I worked a small boat mackerelling for a couple of fairly desultory summers. And then I was very lucky to get on a long liner called the Kilravick, very fine boat, Porthleven skipper, Michael Hoskin. And the first trip I was 100 miles west of the Longships for 5 days. And I think everyone on board were waiting for me to be desperately ill, and I just was very lucky. I never was. So I stuck it. I was there for nearly 15 years. But it was great. And I made good money. We didn't make a fortune, but we made good money during the 70s. And it taught me a great deal. And I see a connection between the two, between mountains, rock climbing, that side of it, and fishing and sailing and so on. So they have. It's like boys' own adventure, I have to confess. When I go to research or write a guidebook about Spain or Greece or even North Pakistan and Canada, places like that, you'd think, wow, how amazing. You must get deep into these places. Well, you do, but you'd get nowhere as close as I have done to this wonderful landscape here, because of course I spent years almost crawling up and down vertically, crawling around, looking at everything, and repeatedly doing so. So you slowly but surely become part of it in a way. But the one thing I have found, and I think it's perhaps the most fascinating aspect of it, is that without total recall, and not all of us have much recall, it always seems different. And it's usually the weather, the time of year, patently so. But it's the minutiae, even the smaller aspects of it. You can go to a cliff or an area of scattered boulders like this is, and you just, to me, suddenly, I've been here, I've passed this, I used to run here a lot on the moors, up and down these paths. But now I'm looking around and I'm going, God, look at that. Totally different piece of rock there, the way they lie against each other. I think that's the important part. So when you're away, wandering around great cities or Greek islands, of course you're absorbing and you're taking from that. But obviously you're never going to quite get hold of that locale, if you like. I know I rarely went on holiday when I was fishing. Very unkind to my wife, really, who would have loved to. But we fished. It was a way of life. And I actually used to say, I don't want to go on holiday for 2 weeks, because I wouldn't enjoy that. I want to stay somewhere for 6 months or a year and really find out about it. And you can't do that with the world. You can't do that. So its next best thing is what I've been doing now for nearly the past 15, 20 years, which is writing travel guidebooks. It gets me into places very intensively for maybe 6 weeks. It's wonderful because I come away and I certainly haven't been on holiday, and I've learned something about it, but I'm very conscious that it's only the surface. I've scratched the surface. Whereas I come back here and I feel completely at home, completely happy in this aspect of the Cornish environment, the coast and the moors, I suppose. Writers that I would refer to, for instance, while I would be writing these coast and country pieces, checking details, would be people like J.T. Blight, John Blight's book, A Week at Land's End, an absolute classic masterpiece. And Folliot Stokes, I forget what his first name is. Now, he wrote wonderful purple prose, but it was just this side of being acceptable. You get quite carried away with it. And he was a great man for sitting on top of rocky promontories, pouring the purple into the sea. You know, it was wonderful stuff. And Hudson was another great influence. And Arthur Andrews, who, as I think I spoke about before, who lived at Eagle's Nest and was a great mountaineer and created the sport of sea cliff climbing. Andrews wrote poetry. He also wrote a guidebook, which was really more about the landscape of the coasts and moors. Quite wonderful stuff. And the painting, without question, people like your father, Peter Lanyon, Patrick Heron, whom I knew well, and the people like Hepworth. I mean, I can remember in my early references thinking about her, and of course recognizing all around us the actual shapes and forms that she was doing out of the granite, and quite blasphemously sometimes thinking, I know better bits of rock than that. A month ago, these waters and sun-baked cliffs were like something you might write home about from the Greek islands. But now, on the steep sea-stained cliff below the towers, where hundreds of kittiwakes nest in spring and early summer, there was no sign of life. The birds, including the immature tarracks, have scattered offshore where they spend the winter unless storm winds wreck them. From the mouth of the great cave cleft at Rosemergy, the sense of height and distance was intense. Below here, the bracken-covered slopes pitched suddenly into thin air, and the whole reach of cliff from Trevine to Tregaminion and Chai Praise curved to the west, laced with white spray at the tide line. Far offshore, dark anvil clouds built across the sky, and in the gathering dusk, the air above the cliffs was full of the smell of rain and damp earth and a winter sea.